Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, a podcast where we dive into the intersection of storytelling and game design. I'm your host, Gerald Ford, and today I'm excited to have Yuri Guzon Mainka join me. As a narrative designer at Inflexion Games, Yuri has a unique perspective on crafting narratives in the gaming industry. With the recently released Nightingale Realms Rebuilt, Yuri is at the forefront of innovative storytelling in games. And today the two of us are going to explore the lens of imagination from the art of game design by Jesse Schell. Yuri, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Garros. I've been following the podcast for a while now, and I'm actually very honored to be here and having the opportunity to contribute to what you do here.
Well, dude, I'm flattered, and I'm the honored one, I assure you. I'm a massive fan of your work, of the stuff that all of you guys are doing in Inflexion. Congratulations to you and the whole team on Realms Rebuilt. That is a lot of fun. You guys did a great job, so that's really cool.
Yeah, very, very proud of that. So much work. You saying it was just like, it's insane the amount of work we put in that release. Damn, I'm very happy with it.
Oh, you have every right, man. It's such a fun game, and I'm sure it's just going to keep getting better. So I'm along for the ride, but we'll dive into that. But we're actually here today because you're one of the guests that are going to help me explore the lenses. I've been slowly working my way through the lenses from the art of game design. It's been 9 months now we've been at it. So we're picking away. And today we're going to talk about the lens of imagination as it applies to narrative design, game design, writing, the craft in general. But before we dive into it, we need to set the foundation. Who is Yuri? How did you fall in love with gaming and writing and level design, quest design, all of the wonderful things that you do? How did you get into it? And how did you get from little baby Yuri to here today?
Yeah, it's starting with a very loaded question, so let's dive right into it. I guess, for me, like many people in our industry, I grew up playing video games. I always gravitated towards those ones with a very strong sense of adventure and a really cool story to tell. Like, my favorite franchise of all time is The Legend of Zelda. I learned English playing Zelda and stuff like that. So I really always loved myself immersing myself into new believable worlds, like meeting new characters, exploring new places. And while I certainly enjoyed these games, ever since I was a child, I always had that question on the back of my mind of who thought of this? How does this work? Why is this character here and now? Why are they doing what they're doing? So that's just to say that from a relatively young age, I always knew what I wanted to do with my life. I feel very fortunate in that sense because from the very beginning, I know I'm going to make games. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that entails. I don't know what I need to do to get there, but I know I'm going to do it. I remember telling my mom when I was a child, hey, Mom, I'm going to work at Nintendo. And she's like, okay, son, cool, eat your veggies. That type of conversation. She doesn't know what Nintendo is. She's like, okay, he has a dream. That's cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, specifically, I always wanted to create games where gameplay and story were as tight as possible, really. Games in which players can experience this impactful narrative, not just through well-written dialogue, mind you, but also through games' quests, characters, location, environmental storytelling. Unbeknownst to me, I was very much describing the domain of a narrative designer at the time by just saying these things that I just mentioned. So yeah, my journey on that wasn't as straightforward as one would think. I grew up in Brazil, where the games industry is not as developed as in North America, or at least certainly wasn't in my time when I was there. So you would be hard pressed to find anything related to close to a game design program to study. So due to that, I decided to go with the next best thing in my mind, which was to get a bachelor in computer science, because that was the closest thing I could get to programming in games, if that was the case. And if everything didn't work out for me, I would be able to work on tech, which is always going to be worth it, I guess.
Yeah.
That's something that a lot of game developers in Brazil had to consider. When we are talking about designing games, you always had to have a plan B in your head. What if games doesn't quite work out? That was always the idea there. But anyways, fast forward a couple of years, during college and after graduating, I actually founded a small indie studio with my friends I think we called Crimson Studios at the time, just like a very small, like 6 people team. And it just, that's an interesting story because it began with half-joke concept of a game called Barrio, inspired by, you guessed it, Mario, but taking place inside the world of the periodic table. It was a very weird concept, but we were very interested in making that happen for some reason. Spoiler alert, that game never happened, but we were going to carry it in our hearts forever. But what did happen was that group we had together participated on a contest that Square Enix was organizing in Latin America at the time. I don't remember the details, but we had to make a game to ship to that contest. And we actually missed the deadline for that game because we did it in the YOLOest way possible, that only someone that's very oblivious to the notion of game development and scope in general would decide to do it. Like, we picked a free engine called Gideros that was not like heavily supported. We used all the free software we could. We were very inexperienced. Like, Unity was not as accessible for us, the people that do not have that much money to spend on it. So yeah, and we went very a little bit ambitious of an idea. Just instead of making one game, why won't we make 12? Like 12 mini games. Like, you know how WarioWare works? You know, like those very micro games. And let's make all of them to prove to Square Enix that we know what we're doing.
Oh my.
So you can... ultimately, we obviously cut a lot of it and we missed a deadline, but we still wanted to finish the game, and we actually shipped it on Play Store. It's not listed anymore, so for better or worse, no one can see it. But we learned a lot. You know, it was a very interesting journey, and like, it was nice to do that with my friends, and that led me to work with another indie studio called Give Me Five in Brazil, where like an instructor that I was studying like a game design course online, and this instructor reached out to me, hey, do you want to work here? I'm like, okay, sure, let's do it. And yeah, I did programming there as well a little bit. But ultimately, I always knew, like, if I were to follow my dream of working on the biggest games in my dream companies, I knew that my future lied abroad. I knew that I would have to leave Brazil, to pursue my education in games, and also my professional work, really. So I began searching for schools with renowned game design programs in the US and Canada. And during that search, I found Vancouver Film School, which was, I don't know what, like, the stars aligned, but as I was looking for VFS, they actually came to Brasilia, where I was, to do like a talk and like invite international students. And I'm like, well, that's convenient. Let's talk. So I ended up getting a scholarship with them, and I moved to Vancouver to pursue my dream of studying and working in games. That was back in 2016. So yeah, I just want to take a second here, if you don't mind, to acknowledge that I definitely recognize that I was in a very privileged position, where not only I had significantly from a work job in Brazil, but also like my mother was absolutely pivotal in supporting me through the beginning of this crazy journey. Like, I'm going to be forever thankful for her. To her, it was the first time in my life that I was living alone as well, and I'm also always going to look back to that year very fondly as a year of a lot of personal and professional growth for me. So yeah, VFS was crazy demanding. Yeah, it's extremely intensive program. 1 year. They like to sell it during my time as like 4 years into one, 3 years into one. So I was at school from Sunday to Sunday, from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Like, there was no break. And that's what I mean by being fortunate, because I did have the resources to sustain myself here while I was doing that. As if I had to work, that would not have been possible, right? But it was extremely intense. However, one of the best years of my life. I would do it again. Like, I had a blast. I grew so much. I met so many awesome people. And eventually I graduated with honors from the program. And I actually won an award there for Best Narrative Project with a writing partner of mine in our interactive narrative class. And it's like, I don't have any awards beside that one. But that one is like, if I don't get any other awards in my career, I'm going to be happy with that one because that meant the world to me. That was my favorite class. That was my my dream of working in narrative, and I was recognized for that. And I don't know, I'm very happy about it. It was really, really cool. Yeah, so I guess after that, I eventually landed a job at a local company here in Vancouver called Eastside Games, where I worked as QA for a while on IP-based mobile games like Trailer Park Boys and Always Sunny in Philadelphia. That was also the studio where I made my transition from QA to game design. Also, big shout out to my manager at the time, Shane Elliott. Amazing guy. He listened to me talk about my desire to become a game designer almost on a daily basis. And he, instead of being like, no, just go do your job, he was always like, okay, let's make this happen. What do I need to do to help you? Let's talk to other departments and so on. So he supported me all the way. And that led me to, go out of my way to prove that, hey, I am worthy of being a game designer. Let me show you what I can do. Let me show you how good I can be. And eventually that paid off. I worked a little bit as a game designer there, as a junior designer, until I was off and off to land what felt like a dream job for me in the form of a quest designer position in another mobile company here in Vancouver called Kabam. And there I was hired to work specifically in partnership with Disney on their biggest mobile hit at that time, which was called Disney Universe. So I went from working on all the RPG games to suddenly, hey, I'm gonna work with Disney guys. Like that was why it's happening. It meant the world to me, like to be given that chance. But yeah, my time at Kabam will be something I will forever cherish because not only I was making quests for a really cool game that I genuinely believed in, I also ended up leading the narrative effort on the project. I was actually the only narrative designer in that project. Kabam didn't really have that many narrative designers in the company, so I think I was the second on in the company, but the only one on Mirrorverse. So yeah, like I became a narrative designer there. I worked directly with Disney. I was writing with Disney. I was directing the story of our game, like pitching our story acts and the story mode. It was wild, Garrett. Honestly, I don't know if I hope I made it justice because people trusted me way too much on these things. But I honestly had a blast. Like the nature of our project, I don't know how much if you played Mirrorverse, but in that game, it's almost like an alternative timeline, like where we create a divergent universe where Disney characters transform and they evolve and they go in completely different adventures, divergent from their movies. So the nature of that project allowed us freedom that was unheard of in a Disney game. Like, where else would you find a story where Belle learns dark magic from Maleficent and they work together to stop Jafar? Cool. It's that level of, can we explore these themes? Can we make someone that's like as pure as Belle explore a darker side of her identity, see if she, like, how she reacts to it? I actually pitched that story that was on Act 1, and I'm very glad that Disney accepted it. Was not expecting it to work, but here we are. It did. But yeah, it was super, super, super cool. However, all good things must come to an end, I guess. Around the beginning of 2023, Kabam had a massive layoff, and I was one of the ones impacted. So that ended my journey there. That's my search eventually led me to Inflexion Games, which is where I am now. And I interviewed it. There's a funny story around how I joined Inflexion because Aaron, the CEO, reached out to me on LinkedIn, and I was interviewing for a narrative designer position, but I actually did not get that position initially. Ultimately, the company ended up going with two different candidates that had more industry experience than me. You actually met one of them, Barbara, who is my manager now.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, she's absolutely amazing human being. Like, she's been super kind, helping me like land in the proper narrative position there. So I was actually hired as an encounter designer at Inflexion, which is essentially a level designer for our games. So I was making a lot of different levels for our procedurally generated maps and so on. But again, this was another case in which I joined the studio and I told my manager, I really want to do narrative. Can I help with narrative? Can I help? Can you do it? Would you let me do it? Please, please, please. And eventually people are like, okay, fine, here, go. So it worked out. I was able to go like out of my way again to prove that I was able to do what I wanted to do. And I shifted officially to narrative designer almost a year ago.
Nice.
Yeah, and the rest is really history. Now I'm a narrative designer working in one of the coolest survival crafting games ever made. No bias here.
No, not at all. Yeah, you wore Barbara down is what you did. You just
basically. It's like, hey, can you help me? Hey, can I work? Hey, do you need any help? Hey, what about this?
You're right. She's fantastic. She's incredible. That's so cool, man. That's a great story.
Yeah. So
I'm curious. I always ask everybody, did you play other games growing up? And as you along the way, did you play tabletop role playing, Dungeons and Dragons, board games?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I was mostly I've always been much more interested in like the digital gaming, like just like video games in general. But I played a lot of board games. I love board games so much. I didn't play as much D&D as you would expect, I guess. But I had some sessions. The interesting thing about D&D is that the older you become, the hardest it is to actually get a group together to play for like many sessions and many hours. Adults are just busy people, man.
Especially when you start having children, then it gets crazy. But then the children get older and you have more time back. And just trust me, eventually you'll get to play again.
Fair enough.
When you get old like me.
Oh yeah. Come on.
That's really cool, man. And and you guys just released Realms Rebuilt. Well, I mean, it's a month or so ago now, I suppose, but recently anyways. So that's a cool story. That's Yuri's story. I like it.
Yeah. Very long one, but here we are.
Nah, that's not long. There's lots still coming though, lots to be written. All right, well let's dive into the topic of the day. Let's talk about the lens of imagination. So, I guess I like to start with foundation. That's kind of how I work this whole thing is lay down a basement before we start building a house. So, lens of imagination. How do you interpret this lens from the book? Why do you think it's crucial? What is it?
Yeah, honestly, I was very happy when you approached me with this lens in mind, because I think it's like it's a crucial one. It's like, obviously there are a lot of important ones about there, but this one is such a key consideration for so many art forms, especially games. For me, this lens is all about the balance. The author Jesse Schell states that like the game ultimately doesn't happen on the screen, it doesn't happen on the controller, it happens in the player's mind, right? That's where the player's experience is truly happening. Your game is essentially a way of like engaging the player and helping them craft that mental model of what the game, of what their experience is. And they do that through their imagination. So it's imperative that we as designers consider how much we are giving in terms of like details in a game, and how much we want players to fill in the blanks. That's the key of this lens for me. It's the balance of how much detail we give, how much detail we expect players to fill. As you know, games aren't necessarily very easy to make. So in any given project, there will always come a time when you will simply not have the time or the resources to give as much detail to every part of the experience. Like, you're not going to be able to flesh out everything. In the past, that used to be due to tech limitations, right? For example, like text-based games or like NES games, you always had some limitation, and there was always a level of abstraction that was expected from both designers and players. But these days, I would argue that these moments of where these limitations come up should actually be embraced. Like, what if you didn't have to add all the detail to flesh out completely something in front of the player? Is there any way you can give just enough so the player's imagination is inspired by it, and they start filling in the blanks? For me, like this lens also lends itself very well to the idea of affordances in games. Like if I'm making, let's say, a Disney theme-based RPG, wink, wink, it's very easy to imagine that, for example, Mike and Sully from Monsters Inc. should have some sort of synergy. They are from the same IP. If I put these two characters in front of you and you're a Disney fan, chances are you would expect them to work well together. That's just how it is, right? Like, so why not lean into that expectation? Why, like, if you were to do the other way around and make Mike and Sully very difficult to work together, you will be working against something that players already know, which is going to make your job a little bit harder because it's a whole new reality that you're introducing to them. So if your game can lean on affordances, be them IP based or real life, for example, if I touch fire, I expect to be burned, right? It's one last step that the player must take to understand your game. You can always have like a game in, I don't know, like fire behaves like water. Like, sure, you can do that, but you will need to be ready to spend a significant amount of time helping players wrap their head around that idea, right? So it's something you gotta take that into consideration.
It makes sense.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, it does. It does. It does. It raises more questions, but it does answer that question. We have consideration for like genre, like you mentioned earlier, environmental storytelling. So let's say you're playing a survival crafting game where you're jumping from realm to realm, perhaps, maybe just for an instance, just off the top of my head here, and you come across ruins of an ancient civilization. Genre, you're instantly going to be expecting certain type of environmental storytelling built into the ruins. Is there space there to play with expectations? Can you use environmental storytelling and the player's imagination in this case to tell different stories and to twist expectations?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I can give you like a funny example that happened when a game was in its earlier versions, already in early access, before realms are built. We have, like, if you explore the realms, you can find caves, right? And these caves have enemies, they have gems, they have secrets. Not all of them, but some of them do. And we also obviously do set dressing to them. In one of these caves, there was an artist put like, I think it was like a skeleton in a diving helmet, like a diving helmet suit.
Yeah.
And there was ultimately no lore behind it, but the fact that skeleton existed there in a desert map made I remember watching a streamer play and be like, oh, what is this guy doing here? What does this mean? I wonder if the past, this realm was actually filled with water, and it dried. I'm like, man, that's cool. Like that. You see, like just a small detail that flashes up, and suddenly the player is taking a very small detail, like so far, to make their own experience. Maybe for them that's what that realm was. Like, there's nothing officially backing that, but there's no reason that can't be the truth for them. Yeah.
Does the fact that a game is procedurally generated to one degree or another make it more difficult to engage the imagination, or does it help? Like, how does that play into it?
That's a very good question. And I would say that, like, unless you have very robust procedural systems to allow you to tell intentional stories in a randomized way, which is as complicated as it sounds, it will be easier if you have like a more structured view for it, right? Which is actually the reason that we made Realms Rebuilt, right? Like, our game was leaning too heavily on the side of procedural generation to the point where we were not able to tell the story that we wanted to and onboard players the way we wanted to in the world of Nightingale. So we ended up creating what we call storied realms. And in these storied realms, we are hand placing and we are intentionally triggering things at certain times so players have the optimal experience there. At the same time, we are leading them, telling them like, hey, this is your journey, but then you have all of these what we call untamed realms to explore, which are the procedurally generated ones. And in these ones, we let go a little bit of the heavy emphasis on intentional storytelling to more emergent storytelling, if you say, like the example that I gave you with the diving suit helmet.
Like it. Well, aside from, I mean, those obvious examples, can you think of another example that's a good one of when you've used the lens of imagination in your work?
Oh yeah, and I can give you. Let's. I mean,
How many you got?
let's even begin. Yeah, let's do a couple from Mirrorverse, I guess, and then my DJO. So in Mirrorverse, like I mentioned, I was designing and writing for that game's story mode. And in that game, it's a 3D action RPG game, team-based combat. You form a group of 3 Disney characters, and you go through a sequence of battles in a given map, right? So in that game, you explore a variety of famous Disney locations. How does exploration work in that game? Well, we have 2... Essentially, when you enter a story chapter, you go into a 2D background of a Disney area. So let's say you go to Agrabah. So there's going to be a 2D map that represents Agrabah and a selection of 3D arenas that are loosely related to that 2D concept art. So essentially what happens there is we, as quest designers, we place nodes on top of the map to create the sense of like the feeling of a path or a journey that the player is engaging with, right? So we don't have like characters walking through that escape area and fighting enemies. What you have is you have the nodes that convey the path you're taking. You click on a node, you're transported into the 3D rendering of that map, and then you fight the battles there, you win, and then you go to the next node, and so on, right? So these battle nodes, they are placed intentionally in parts of the map to create that journey. And then later on, players, for example, have to revisit previous locations. Maybe you go to Agrabah chapter 3, and then you go back to Agrabah chapter 7. We change the locations of these nodes to convey that there's a different journey happening there. And this is also true of the arenas. You know, in the game, each battle is comprised of waves, and clearing them causes the characters to walk from left to right on the screen, and then there's a fade to black, and then they go, the next arena is loaded in, right? The reality is that the arenas aren't actually physically connected. You know, when the characters go to the right of the screen and the game fades out, we load the next arena and place the characters back on the left side of the screen. So, but through the imagination there, like through connecting the dots in a very smart use of transition, it gives the experience that the player ultimately gets is that they transition from left to right. They went from screen A to screen B, even though it's the same screen, right? So the experience that you get is that you are moving forward, which means that the path design and the arena selection that we do in the game are very important. You know, like I need to make sure that these arenas are obviously designed in a way that they can seamlessly blend together to a certain extent. But if I have a battle node that's near Agrabah's palace, then I should make sure that we have the arena that represents that palace in that node as well. Otherwise, it's gonna create a little bit of a weirdness to the player. Like I wasn't expecting to be here. Why am I here? You know. So you want to make sure that the 2D and 3D are working together, and that you're very intentional about how you want that, where these loads are going to be and which arenas the player is going to be engaging with. Again, all to support that idea of like, hey, we don't have a lot of resources, so how do we make the player feel like they're in a journey with the resources we have, you know?
Right.
And so that's on the Mirrorverse front. On the Nightingale side, again, there's a lot of examples, but one that comes to mind is how we make use of dialogue in interactable objects in the world. For example, there's a realm called Magwitch Martius that I think it's the 3rd realm that you visit in the campaign now, and that's a realm that I was heavily involved in. And the first quest in that realm is you arrive in the middle of an enemy invasion, right? Like you're on this town, it looks deserted, the town is very much destroyed, save for a church nearby where the survivors are hiding, leaving players to imagine like, oh, what happened here? You know, like I wonder how it got to this state, you know? So reclaiming the town from the enemies, turn on these energy pylons around the town that are supposed to be a type of defense system. There's like an animation that happens there. that like there's like a barrier that forms and then disappears. So that's just to convey the idea of like, hey, you did good, like the enemies were defeated. Now that barrier is there, you can feel safe, right? So even if that didn't actually got rid of the enemies, just from seeing that animation play out, you really get the feeling like, oh, I did something good. Like I feel like maybe I'm protected now. And then that's something that we have to pay off through actual gameplay. And another character's quest line that this is a shorter one, but I'm still like weirdly proud of this one. But I'm not going to give too much spoilers because that's like, it's a side quest, but it's later in the game. But this character demands that you bring them a tool that's made of iron, right? So this is a place where we could simply have asked the player on a quest side to do like, hey, craft a tool that's made of iron, and there you go, you're done. Like the character's going to react to it, and you're done. But I wanted to like do one step further if I could. It's a very small detail, but you can't actually just make the tool. You have to equip it. So you need to be holding the tool for the NPC to see, oh, you're holding an iron tool, so that means you are not a Fae, so I can trust you. You know.
Oh.
So that's the whole thing of this character. They don't trust you because they don't know if you're a Fae or not. And in our game, we mentioned that Fae are like antagonistic to iron. So by wielding iron in front of this character, you prove that you're human. So that's the key, right? Like instead of just like, hey, make a tool and I don't know, like extract it, put it in your inventory, whatever. No. You gotta show this NPC that you're holding it. You know, and we were able to do that, and I don't know, I felt that added a little bit of immersion to the interaction. You know,
that's a clever detail. It's a nice touch. I like that.
Yeah,
you mentioned when you're talking about Mirrorverse, you mentioned how if it was the wrong setting, there would be a dissonance there. It would feel disjointed because you're in the wrong place.
Yeah,
that raises the question: this lens of imagination that's so powerful and so beneficial. There's kind of a dark side to it too, though. A player's imagination can break immersion. A player's imagination, when something in the game is in the wrong place, can suddenly make them go wandering off trying to figure out what's going on, and their imagination can completely take them off the rails.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually a very good point. And that's the reason that the key to this lens is not to completely stifle the player's imagination or to completely inspire it in the wrong way. The key of this lens is balance. Right. You need to deliver enough to point players in the right direction so they can be inspired in the direction that to have the experience that you want them to have, right? To have the best experience in your game. Things that are like deviating from that vision can hurt your game more than help, right? Ultimately, like everyone's going to have their own experiences, but it's your job as a designer to make sure that you're giving players the ingredients to form a fantastic experience in their heads. And that's as close as the one that you envisioned it, right? Because again, that's another thing that the book is also very good at. It's mentioning it's never going to be one-to-one, right? Like the experience that the designer is envisioning and it's building in the game, it's never going to be 100% what the player experiences, because the player experiences like something that's like completely biased, like it's inside their minds. It's based on their experiences as a human, really. So our goal is to get as close as we can, basically, to that experience.
100%. Very cool. Well, I mean, we're talking a lot here about like design, level design, setting design, concrete things like in a craft. I'm a survival crafting nut. That's kind of my favorite genre. So I think,
nice.
You know, games where you gather resources, you refine resources, you craft something, there's a lot left to imagination there. We see a guy standing at a table doing this, and then suddenly he's got a pickaxe in his hand. There's imagination at play. But
yes,
what about narrative? At what point, where does this play into the narrative structure? How do we play with player imagination when it comes to the story we're telling or the character expectations or the arcs? Or
oh my God, yeah. Hugely important, I would say. Like narrative designers are, I guess, like designers in general really would be wise to consider how player imagination factors in any of their designs. It's such a powerful tool if we approach it with the clear intent of making use of it, be it by completely detailing something or not detailing enough, but giving them the direction. You know, We talked about this a lot already, but imagination is where the experience takes place. I would argue the best games know what to detail and what to leave to the player's imagination to amplify whatever their experience is. And to give you an example of that, I'm also a huge fan of horror games. And horror games are exceptional. The good ones, of course, are in playing with the player's imagination and using it in their favor, right? Like you have, just like Silent Hill 2 recently coming out, right? Like the whole idea with the fog, you don't know what's coming, you just hear things, your mind fills in the blanks, and you're suddenly scared. Maybe there's nothing there, but you're already like imagining, like, what if there is something there? You know, it's just a very, very smart use. That's just like inherent to the genre, really. And through an example that's a little bit more narrative specific, I guess, another big franchise that I'm a big fan of is the From Software games, Elden Ring specifically. And really, these guys are just like masterminds of like environmental storytelling and using your imagination to, you know, like enhance the narrative experience there. I will say that the games might not be for everyone due to its challenge, and in the narrative itself is very vague, maybe too vague and obtuse at times. But they do such an amazing job of giving you just enough details so that people will become fascinated by the world you created. People start theorizing about potential connections. Oh, I saw this item description that mentioned that this character was alive during this time of this war. I wonder what happened there. What was the conflict? How did they die? You know, like it can absolutely work in your favor, and as players fill in the intentional blanks, right? That's the key here. Like From Software is not simply writing things and leaving things, well, whatever, we don't need to flesh out that character. No, we want players to be part of fleshing out that character, you know? Like they're going to give you some backstory and some way of connecting the dots, but ultimately there are a lot of concepts in Elden Ring that don't have an actual like unified source of truth, I guess. You know, there are many theories to why certain characters are the way they are, what motivated certain characters to do certain actions, and that's okay. You know, as long as it's intentional, then that's okay, because then you have the community almost like being part of your writing team in a way, in a weird way.
But you're engaged, you're getting them involved. They're buying in. It becomes part of their world, not just yours. Like that becomes a way of getting them completely immersed and invested. That's so
exactly
powerful.
And it does a very good job of fostering a great sense of community as well. Because people, especially nowadays, right? Like it's easy for people to get together on the internet and start like, oh, I found the secret, guys. What do you think? What do you guys think this means? Oh, I found this other secret. Oh my God, if we piece A and B together, oh my God, you know, we found something amazing and we did it together as a group. That's one of the best feelings.
Destiny 2 has always been amazing for that. As toxic as the community can be, and don't get me wrong, there are some really good parts of that community, but there's always been a sense of shared lore and problem solving and riddle solving and puzzle solving. Like it's always been so fun to watch and be part of back when I had time to play it. But yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah.
Looking back so far along your journey, can you think of any really memorable experiences from your work in narrative design that really highlight, like you've touched on, you've told us a lot of them, but is there something that really highlights the importance of imagination in storytelling? Like something that really jumps out?
I think the best thing that comes, the most important thing that comes to mind is that in game dev, we don't always have the resources we need to realize an idea. And we often find ourselves having to get very creative to circumvent technical or design limitations when trying to fulfill our goal or realizing a story beat in the best way possible. So maybe it's not like a specific experience, but like on a day-to-day basis when we are working with, okay, so we have this story beat, we have this dialogue. As a narrative designer, my job is to think, how can I best realize this, right? How can I best represent this dialogue or this experience in a game with the tools we have? And sometimes that means like, hey, can we request new tools? Most of the time, you're not going to be able to get the new tools. So how can you work with existing ones? And that's where the imagination comes to play heavily, as we have to navigate these. Like, okay, so I can't have characters shaking hands. What if instead I have a dialogue, that the scripted dialogue that says you shake hands with the character, not ideal, but maybe it's enough for players to be like, okay, I know what's happening here. Like I can see that the dev is aware. Like I shook hands. Like sometimes that's enough. You would be surprised to see how much one can get away with in these situations where we ask players to fill the blanks, and most of the time people are going to be like, sure, it's fine. Like no one's going to think twice about the fact, oh my God, how unbelievable, unacceptable that these guys don't have like the characters shaking hands. Like it's perfectly acceptable, depending on the game, to be like the characters shook hands, and that's fine.
It sounds like it's about balance. It's about finding a balance between the two extremes, somewhere in the middle, letting the player do some of the heavy lifting for you when you have to.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, very, very so.
Well, I think we're starting to get to the end of this, but I am curious. I want to add a little bit of extra value here. What would you say is some advice perhaps you'd give to aspiring narrative designers or game devs in general when it comes to the importance of imagination? Like, how can they make their skills better? What can they practice? What do they need to consider in this realm?
Oof. Yeah, that's a really tough question. Like I never know if I have like enough advice that's like meaningful enough to give at this point in my career, but I want to try it, I guess. Like what comes to mind is for me, it's really to immerse yourself in the media that you enjoy, like be it books, games, etc. Go play, go read, get inspired. Let your imagination run wild when thinking about these worlds and in which these stories take place. And then like just start asking, like, can you think of any other stories in these worlds, that might happen? Like maybe it's not mentioned in the game, but what about like people or specific characters that live in that world? Or perhaps you can be inspired by the media that you engage with. And maybe I don't have to write a new character for Elden Ring, but boy, I can be inspired by that world and maybe think about a world of my own. In short, I think the best way to cultivate these skills is to get inspired and to create. No matter your inspiration here, like use it to write, use it to design, use it to draw, and eventually even play. See where that takes you. We talked about D&D earlier in the conversation, but I think that's a great way of flexing those creative muscles with your friends. If you can find a group that can get together and have fun, the key here is just to, I know it sounds like it might be a bit of cliche, but it's really just to just do it, put things on paper, put things on a screen, don't seem, for me, it's I had this bad habit of waiting until I had the perfect idea to start doing something. Like that moment's not gonna come, man. Like just do it. Just put your idea on paper. You might have an awesome idea and you don't even realize it, So yeah, I guess just like getting inspired and acting on that inspiration is the best advice I can give.
That's fantastic advice, man. That's great advice. You should be sharing that with the world. Love it. Well, you just did, I guess.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're going to put a pin in that topic for today, but before we start heading for the door, there is a question I like to ask everybody who comes on the show, regardless of who you are or what you do. You've probably heard it if you've listened to even one episode of the show. So my question is, in my opinion, there exists a magical space at the intersection of obviously story and game, but also improv, comic book writing, music, theater, all of these things where we can all come together and just hang out. There's a shared fellowship. There's a shared language. If you agree with me, and not everybody does, but if you do, what is the magical thread that holds that space together?
Okay, so ironically, I think the short answer is imagination is that thread.
There we go.
So our desire to tell, it's basically our desire as a species to tell, listen to, and experience stories. Like, I think that's such a good question, and it really makes you think, because that's just like, stories are just something that we as humans, we are wired for, right? And it benefits us greatly in various ways. It's very interesting to observe how, as we evolve as a species, so does the way we tell stories, right? So you mentioned like games, you mentioned fictions, other forms of entertainment. Ultimately, those are ways of telling stories, right? From drawings in caves to verbal communication, writing movies, and now games. It's always been about how to best tell the stories that we have in our heads. And interactivity that comes with video games is just the next step in that evolution. For me, one thing that all of these forms have in common is the fact that we are using our imagination to craft and experience stories.
It's like I queued it right up. It's the obvious answer. It's the name of the episode, but it's also a fantastic answer. So I love asking that question because I hear different answers every time, and I've asked it 100 times now or something. But it's also the little bit afterwards where somebody like digs into the psychology or the sociology or the evolutionary tool that is story in games. Like that's the whole reason I did this little podcast experiment, is to hear those stories.
Yeah.
All right, man, we're going to start heading for the door and getting out of my little imaginary tavern here. But before we go, I'd like to ask you some quick fire questions to get to know Yuri a little bit better. And
let's do it.
What are you reading these days?
I'm reading The Art of Game Design.
Good book.
Yeah, it's a great book. Yes. Where's mine? Here.
What are you playing these days besides Nightingale?
Oh, yeah. I've been on a Remedy spree for the past few months. I was eager to play Alan Wake 2. So I played Alan Wake 1. I played American Nightmare. I recently finished 2, which is absolutely phenomenal, like a great game to explore the lens of imagination, mind you. And now I'm playing Control, which is the last Remedy game that I'm missing, aside from, I guess, Quantum Break, but I'm not sure if I'm going to play that one. But I'm playing Control now, and I'm very excited to go back to Alan Wake 2, because I believe today, at least at the time of the recording, the Lake House DLC is releasing for that game. So I'm very eager to go back.
I didn't know that. That's cool. Right on.
Yeah.
Right, there goes more of my time. Okay, well, here's the last quickfire question. This is the hard one, though. If your essence, the essence of who Yuri is, was distilled down and then injected into a game, and this could be digital game, board game, tabletop role-playing game, whatever, A, what game/world would it be? And then B, what character/archetype/race and class would you be?
Oh my God. Okay.
Are you, Yuri? Who are you?
Who are you? What an easy question that everybody knows the answer to.
Sit down on the...
I think I would, in terms of essence, the world, the game, I think it will be a Metroidvania in a world that is tough but fair. As hyperactive as I am, like I tend to go like, hey, I'm going to do this task. And suddenly I'm doing 5 other tasks. And then eventually I go back to that original task. So this feels very much in line with a Metroidvania where you explore the world. Eventually you find stuff that makes you better. You go back to what previous areas that you explored, and with new knowledge, you tackle new challenges. So I think I would go with that as my answer. And for race and class, my knowledge on the D&D is severely lacking, as you might have noticed. But based on my most recent playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3, I think I would go with a Dragonborn rogue.
Nice. I now have a Metroidvania analogy to life stuck in my head.
There you go.
Broke down life by the way those games are structured. Those are great answers, man. Those are great answers. All right. I like to open up a little space here right at the end. talk about what you're working on, where people can find you online. Maybe let me know what you're excited about with Nightingale, what's happening that you can talk about, mind you. I don't want you to get in trouble, but what's exciting there? What do people need to pay attention to?
Yeah. So like, I like to say that our narrative team in Inflexion is small but mighty. I'm very, very proud of the work that we shipped in Realms Rebuilt. We offer these fully fledged realms with great characters that you can get to know and how, and a certain amount of tech quests to guide the players through each area. And but I'm saying all of that because Realms Rebuilt was a major milestone, not just for our players, but internally as well. It helped redefine the importance and level of quality that's expected from the narrative delivery in our game. So yes, while that's some of our best work, 80 bar will and should always be getting higher and higher, and that's what we're going to do. We are very excited and pumped to make use of what we learned from Realms Rebuilt and push the story and the ways that we deliver it forward. I don't know if you caught the latest Dev Bytes video that the company released, but in short term, we are looking to deliver a fun Halloween event for our players. That's going to obviously be live during the weekend of Halloween. And in the long term, our next big thing will be to deliver the city of Nightingale to our players. So we are going to be working on getting and realizing that city that people have been like, that's basically the journey. That's what you're doing in a game. Yep. You're looking for Nightingale, and we're going to deliver it to you eventually. So yeah, we're very excited as a narrative team and we're hard at work to craft that experience. And I can wish more with everyone when the time is right, of course.
Well, I'm excited because I'm a big time Nightingale player, and I can't wait. That's so cool. Want to play right now?
Hear that?
All right, man. Well, I'm going to close up shop. It's time to bring this thing to an end. But while I push you out into the cold, is there any parting words of wisdom or final thoughts you'd like to share with us on your way out the door?
I mean, this will be, first of all, just a big thank you to you for like doing what you do, like with this podcast. I am not joking when I say that I am actually I feel very fortunate to be here talking to you about this. Like just having these opportunities to talk all my passion really with people will hopefully help someone, or at the very least, like keep the conversation going about like the importance of our medium and like storytelling. I'm very, very thankful. So yeah, thank you so much for like your podcast. Like I listen to it, and I'm very happy to be part of it. I think in terms of like last thoughts, like in the risk of being a bit cheesy, it's for the people that are like trying to get into the industry and like trying to find the role that they want to, like, just if you can, don't give up on that role, on that dream, even if you don't initially land it. You know, like just from talking about my journey with you, I was someone that I had to push to get to the positions that I wanted multiple times in my career, even after being hired. So yes, I was hired as QA. I tried to prove myself as a game designer. Eventually that worked. I was hired as an encounter designer. Eventually I was able to prove myself as a narrative designer. So yeah, like honestly, if you have that passion, you know, like try that, and you can go out of your way to prove your worth, you're bound to be noticed, and I hope you do. So yeah.
Well, it's time to close up shop once again. Apparently, an insane local bard has challenged a Nightingale to a musical duel down in the town square. There's no way I'm going to miss that. So, I'm going to be locking up the door, but before I go, I want to say once again thank you to Yuri for stopping by and sharing your stories and insights. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. Until we meet again, keep creating, exploring, and sharing those stories and worlds. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the corner of Story and Game.